Hello everybody, I'm Philip J. Watt. This is the Conscious Society YouTube channel, and today we have a really special guest on the program, one that I've wanted to have for a while because what she's going to talk about relates to every single one of us, both on an individual and a collective level. Her name is Ellen Brown. She's the founder of the Public Banking Institute. You can find information around the Public Banking Institute at .org, as well as several other websites, ellenbrown.com, weatherthedebt.com, and many books that she's written. One of her biggest is Weather Debt, and one of her most recent, I think her most recent, is the Public Banking Solution. Now, welcome to the program, Ellen.
Thank you, Philip.
Now, this is a really important discussion because it pertains to money, how the money supply is created, who benefits, what is the mechanisms of it. And you think that as a society, we would know pretty clearly and taught really clearly as children how money is brought into existence in our current age. But that's just not the case. It influences our lives to such a huge degree. We need it to survive. And it's one of those mechanisms to help bring abundance and sort of a progressive approach to dealing with a lot of the issues, the harshness of our world as well. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the money supply and all the rest of what I just spoke about, how about we do a little bit of introduction of yourself and your background?
Okay, well, I'm a lawyer by trade. My first degree was actually in English. I wanted to write the great American nonfiction, but in my 20s, I quickly figured out I couldn't support myself as a writer. So I went to law school and worked as a lawyer for 10 years in Los Angeles. And then my ex-husband burned out on Beverly Hills Law, and we went abroad for 11 years with USAID. We have 2 kids. And that gave me a chance to write. So I wrote my first 10 books, which I consider practice. They were on health, the politics of health. But I could see that if you really wanted to fix the system, that you really had to fix the money system, that was the root of the problem. And so I wrote Web of Debt. Actually, I was interested in that subject, the Federal Reserve and our whole money system, ever since my 20s, but I didn't really know what I could say that was different until I discovered that The Wizard of Oz was written as a monetary allegory in the 1890s. And so that was my hook, and I got to use my English skills. I tried to write it like a novel with a hook at the end of every chapter and, characters and so forth. Or actually it was the characters of The Wizard of Oz. But anyway, I tried to make it somewhat literary, and I spent 7 years doing that, and then it was published in 2008 for the first time. It's actually in its 5th edition, which was 2012. And after the crash of 2008, I knew that there was one bank in the U.S. that was state-owned, the Bank of North Dakota. So I was watching those states that were all going slipping into the red. And at first there were 4 states that were still solvent, and then there were 3, and then there were 2, and then there was 1, and it was North Dakota. And I just suspected it had to do with their bank. And so I studied up on it and started writing on it, and got a lot of feedback and wound up founding the Public Banking Institute. And so that's what we try to do, is to shed some light on what's really going on with our money system, and the fact that we, the people, should be creating the money, rather than banks. And if banks create the money, then we, the people, should own the banks.
All right, well, that leads into my next question. What's wrong with the system? What is the problem that we've got right now? And then we'll move into the solution later.
Okay, well, most people think that money is created by the government. This is not true. In fact, virtually all of our money is created by banks when they make loans. So there really is no money in the system. That's what's wrong with our medium of exchange, that it's really all just credits created in the form of deposits by banks that write them into your checkbook when you take out a loan. the Bank of England just recently acknowledged, well, in the spring of 2014, in their quarterly report, acknowledged that. They said, contrary to popular belief, banks do not lend their deposits. They actually create their deposits when they make loans. And the Bank of England said that 97% of the money supply is actually composed in this way. So our money supply is just debt, which is created by banks. And over the course of 30 years, they expect to get paid back twice as much as they put out there. So you can see in the big picture, there's going to be always a debt overhang. There's always going to be more money owed back than there is money to pay it with. I know there are some commentators who argue that you could theoretically pay the debt with the existing money because of the velocity of money. In other words, say you take out a $10,000 loan and you're supposed to pay it over a year at 20%, so you'd pay $1,000 every month. So you could keep $9,000, pay the $1,000, and then if the banker paid it back to you in the form of wages, let's say they hired you to scrub their floors, then over 12 months you would have paid $12,000, the same $1,000 over and over, and you would get to keep your $9,000. But the problem is you'd have been working for the bank the whole time. They get free labor for a year without doing anything except writing numbers into an account. And you have slaved away scrubbing their floors. So that's where we are, pretty much debt slaves to a financial system that's privately created and purports to be government created.
With the insane profits that get generated out of the finance and banking sector, you'd think those profits would be publicly owned so that we can invest those profits, that interest on loans, etc., into social programs and infrastructure and whatever else we need to make sure that we ensure the vitality and the health and the general happiness of the public. So why is this what the public bank is? Is this where it comes in that it is a publicly owned infrastructure that recycles those profits back into the community instead of being hoarded by oligarchs and ancient multinational or entrepreneurial sort of establishments, organisations who have really monopolised this money supply and are the true beneficiaries of it?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That is what a public bank is. That's the whole point. The profits go back to the government, which is the people, and the government spends them into the economy. They don't lend them back. Well, they do actually lend some of them, but anyway, the government is in control, as you say. They get the profits and they determine what sectors are supported, where the loans go. It's not into speculation, derivatives, and things that are making money without actually creating real things or services in the economy. A public bank does turn its profits over to the state or the city or whoever owns it to spend back into the economy for things that the people need. And the profits go back to the people for public use. So it's a sustainable system instead of having this parasitic system where profits are drained out all the time. They either go into more money-making money schemes, more loans, which always expect more money back than you put out, or offshore tax havens, or paying high-paid CEOs, etc. There's always this drain, this siphon of profits away from the public and the economy. So we wind up with governments that are all heavily in debt. All governments seem to be in debt. If they're all in debt, who are they in debt to? They're in debt to private banks. And so because people are freaked out by debt, then they think they have to go into austerity measures, which means tightening our belts, selling off public assets, reducing public services, all so that we can pay interest to banks that merely created that money on their books. We could be creating the money on our own books, and the profits could be going back to the people and the economy.
There's a couple of things I'd like to mention there. people are quite pissed off at big money, at big power infiltrating government policy and determining the fate of the public, when really the government are employees of the people. But this just doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Multinational monopolies are sort of solidifying, condensing their power through so-called free trade agreements, and being able to basically take a authoritarian stance on the way that we legally look at trade. But then there's also, just in general, a whole ton of environmental and social requirements that we need that seem to be suppressed or evaded through a profit before morality model that the private capitalist sort of business world is running themselves. So is this a way of giving the people more power to shape and determine their own future by basically directing how governments should be spending those profits for the sake of themselves and also our natural systems?
Yeah, well, and it's also a mindset. Instead of thinking that we're in debt all the time and that we have to pay off this debt and we have to tighten our belts, when you realize that money is just the government paying for the things that the people need, that's where money should come from, that it's fine for the government to be out there paying, but not paying money that they borrowed privately and that they owe back with interest. They should be issuing the money themselves. Now, people think that's going to be inflationary, and that's where the catch is. That's where we have to change the minds of the people. It's not inflationary. If you put money out there to pay for goods and services, you will increase supply along with demand, and prices will remain stable. We need more money in order to create more productivity. And if there's a concern about exhausting resources, like we don't want people having so much money that they're always buying frivolous trinkets that are using up resources, you just determine what sectors you want to put that money into. So if you're the government, you could put it into research and development, developing alternative energy systems, methods. I mean, we know there are all sorts of inventions out there just waiting for funding, like how to clean up the oceans, how to clean up the environment. I mean, we can just change our entire lifestyle into something that's sustainable and that's cooperative rather than competitive. We don't need these wars. The wars are all about protecting our trade and so forth. We don't need that. We can cooperate. There are studies that show that cooperation is more efficient, more economically effective. I mean, among animals, when animals cooperate, they are more efficient than when they fight each other.
Absolutely. We're over the war, the military-industrial machine, the war era. We don't need it. We can be at peace. We're all pretty much the same, in the same family, in the same boat. So that old paradigm, that old thinking of imperialism and domination just needs to go. Also, in terms of the energy, I mean, we know salt water, and we've got salt water technology for running engines, a whole ton of different 3D printing and for solar panels, and a whole ton of stuff that we can implement straight away, as well as move through some of the permaculture type energy processes and storage and utilization, as well, to have a closed system and use the energy that's in the area, in the region, and not having to bring it in from elsewhere as well. Now, in terms of the we talked about inflation, deflation. Do we want sort of no inflation? Do we want a little bit of inflation? What would the public bank process be aiming to achieve?
Well, you don't want, actually, economies that are showing healthy growth do have a level of inflation, not hyperinflation, but a certain level of inflation, like Korea. Korea had phenomenal growth. China had phenomenal growth. I mean, there are a number of countries that you can keep up with the inflation because, I mean, one reason for the inflation is that the wage earners want higher wages, which increases costs, and so that drives the price up. But everybody benefits, and as long as that's working, you can allow a certain amount of inflation. But in a system in which the money is created by the government and put out there, and then the government pulls it back in the form of taxes, you can control how much money is out there by controlling taxes. All you have to do, if you find that there's too much money out there, is just to raise taxes. Or there are other ways of getting money back. One way would be, if we are the bank, if we own the bank, then all that interest is going to go back to the government, which is another form of pulling the money back to the center. I mean, you can pull it back and rip it up and maintain a stable money supply. Right now, you've got central banks that think their only way of controlling the amount of money out there is to raise or lower interest rates, which is, I mean, it actually works at cross purposes. And you can see that historically. If you raise interest rates, supposedly that's supposed to make people less likely to borrow, and therefore you're creating less money, and that's supposed to reduce the money supply, but it doesn't. What it does is, or that's supposed to reduce prices, but what it actually does is increase costs. If you've got a 20% interest rate, as we had in 1980, for example, that's a huge cost for producers. So your prices are going to go up; they're not going to go down. So, and now we have, like, our central bank, it lowered interest rates to virtually zero for the money, the rate at which they lend to banks, and now they feel like they have to raise the rates just so that they have, you know, a tool, so that they have a way to lower it again if they need it in order to stimulate the economy, which makes no sense at all. The way to stimulate the economy is to get money out there, which is what they're trying to do. They're trying to create loans, get money out there in the form of loans, but just spend the money into the system, and you will create the the medium of exchange that you need in order to get the wheels of production going. And if you notice that prices are going up, then pull it back in. You can pull it back in with taxes. You don't have to pull it back in by increasing interest rates.
No, that's a good point. The quantitative easing policy of the private central banking system has been an epic failure. Keynesian economics, epic failure. We know this now. It's super clear. Yes, QE did help keep the economy afloat. We probably would have gone into a huge deflationary, depressionary environment without it. But that's probably a necessary thing given the level of debt that we do have in the system. So that's part of the ebb and flow, the ups and downs that we have to go through if we partake in such a system. Also, why don't they, I mean, this whole policy around injecting money into the finance sector, QE, why hasn't QE for the people, as Steve Keen has coined, why hasn't that been done? It makes me think like these guys are, you know, have sinister motives or something. Like, this is a simple bloody philosophy and practical approach to dealing with the fact that the Main Street economy has been completely eroded over the last 8 or so years since the GFC, and potentially beyond. And so because they're not considering these facts and using the power that we do have to create money in an effective way that's going to help the vitality of the people on this, you know, on the street, those who are struggling to get work, wages are stagnated, there's a whole ton of socio-economic problems, food, stamp, you know, I guess necessities for people. There's a whole web of issues that have come through focusing on QE for the finance sector and not injecting it into the Main Street economy. So in terms of sort of decreasing the debt, dealing with because there's a lot of people in the alternative and independent media are really concerned around the fiat debt implosion that we're currently facing. And some people are saying that, you know, within the next few weeks, few months, it's all going to collapse back on us again. Others, like Steve Keen, say, no, we're turning Japanese and we're going to end up in stagflation for quite some time, just like Japan has for 20, 30 years with no growth. So what are your thoughts around how to deal with this massive amounts of debt? Can a public bank deal with this? And is that public bank owned by the people? Is it like a central bank but not privately owned for the people? And another real critical and almost controversial or confronting issue is gold. How do you see gold fit in this? Because a lot of people want to move back to the a gold standard or a precious metal standard where $1 of paper currency equates to $1 dollar of gold?
Well, I'm paying off the debt. You know, Donald Trump just came out and said that we don't have to worry about the debt. The U.S. can't default because we print the money. And he's saying that it could be paid off in 3 years. And everybody says that's ridiculous. But it's not ridiculous. You could pay it off by printing the money. But the question is whether that would be inflationary. And I would argue it won't be inflationary. The money was already spent. In other words, you've got a $19 trillion debt, which is money borrowed by the U.S. government and spent in the economy. That money is already out there. What the people who lent the money, and you know, half of it is the government itself, what they have are bonds. So you've got little pink pieces of paper instead of little green pieces of paper. The little green pieces of paper are not interest bearing. The pink pieces of paper are interest bearing. So all you have to do is give them some green pieces of paper and take back the pink pieces of paper. You've saved yourself the interest and you've balanced your books. You have not added to the money supply. Those people have no more money than they thought they had before. I mean, if you ever, you know, you have let's say you have your money in a stock brokerage or something, and you've got, say you've got some bonds, and then you get notice that your bond has been called, and now you've got a certain amount of cash there instead of bonds. You don't feel like you're richer. You're not going to run out and spend the money because your bond just got turned into cash. What you'll probably do is take that cash and move it into some other form of bond, or maybe into the stock market. It might drive up the stock market, but the stock market itself is a casino. It's not. You're not driving up the price of goods and services. You're driving up the price of a object of gambling. I mean, the money does not go back to the corporation. The only money the corporation got was at the initial public offering, and after that, it's just people hoping to be able to sell their stock for more than they bought it for. So I think that would actually work, but of course, ideally, you do it gradually just to see what happens and make sure you haven't rocked the boat too much. I mean, what other alternative is there? We can't raise taxes enough to pay off the debt, and we can't slash services enough to pay off the debt. You've got to do some. You've got to start thinking in some other way. We can't keep doing what we were doing. It's gotten us in this huge mess. So what is the other alternative? Let's try actually doing what the American colonists did, which is print the money. So, and as for like banks that go bankrupt, right now we have this big bail-in threat where they're making the big banks come up with living wills where they will explain how they will deal with going insolvent. And recently, the Federal Reserve said that J.P. Morgan Chase's living will was so inadequate that they were a threat. They could be a threat to the entire U.S. economy. Well, great. So here you have the biggest of banks that could go insolvent, be a threat to the entire U.S. economy. And that's where my state is California. That's where California is keeping its money. So under the bail-in provisions, they will supposedly make themselves solvent again by turning the money of the depositors, the creditors, including the depositors, into stock in the bank. So here you are, instead of deposits, which you thought you had in this bank, you now have stock in a bank. I mean, theoretically, you're covered up to the insurance limit, but there's questions about that. The FDIC has to stand in line behind the derivatives players, and JP Morgan has, I don't remember the figure now, but it's over $50 trillion in derivatives. So those players are going to go first, and they will snatch the collateral. There could be nothing left for the FDIC or anybody else. So here's another idea. When that bank goes bankrupt, take it over as nationalize it, in other words, which is what they actually used to do. That's what they did with Continental Illinois in the 1990s, which was then, I think, the fourth largest bank in the country. Took it over, nationalized it, and then take those bad loans and just write them off. I mean, they were written into the books in the first place as just credits on, in somebody's checking account. So you can write those off, allow the bank to, because it's you are the bank. So don't worry about the fact that you look insolvent, because it does. And pay print the money to pay the depositors, basically. I mean, the depositors' money was there. Let's just say it's still there. You are the central bank. You have the ability to print the money. I mean, you don't have to do it by actually printing, of course. You just write it into the accounts as it always was. Leave it there in the accounts as those depositors think it is. Leave the deposits as they are, write off the debts. You know, it's all accounting. It's all just numbers on a computer screen, and you can fix all that without stealing the money of depositors who earned it in order to save a banking system that we actually don't need. We could turn that entire banking system into a public system, and I think we would be better off. I think we should all have accounts at the central bank, and that would pretty much would simplify everything and solve the problem, I think. Although, of course, then people don't trust the central bank, so that's another issue. I don't think there's any way that we could go back to a gold system. For one thing, where would we get the gold? We don't have the gold. Everybody knows that Fort Knox is questionable, what's even in there. And I mean, the Germans couldn't get their gold. Why? Because we didn't have it. So we'd have to buy it from the Chinese, which would put us even further into debt. But gold, on the other hand, is an excellent investment if you want to know what to do with your money. I mean, if you're afraid of putting it in a bank, buy some gold or well, it used to be an excellent investment. It's so heavily manipulated, you're still sort of have to pay attention. I mean, it's still not clear it's necessarily going to go up, but at least you'll have something that you can hang on to, a real thing, rather than numbers that can be wiped out by a change in the law or by an insolvency where they bail in your money. There is a bill pending now in the U.S. Congress to forbid the central bank to make low interest loans to state and local governments when they go bankrupt. Well, this is the thing that they just did to the tune of at least $16 trillion for the banks. But for us, the people, for our governments, the governments have to go bankrupt because we don't have a credit line with our own central bank, because they just don't understand how banking works or how money works. Of course, the state and local governments should be able to borrow directly from the central bank for virtually nothing, because it's all government, and it's a credit line. I mean, it's a backup credit line that if they borrow for the right purposes, if they borrow for infrastructure, there are a lot of studies that show that the money you put into infrastructure comes back multiply, not just once. You don't just get paid back, but it's several times the amount of money you put out there. So let's say the central bank were to lend to California for infrastructure. You're going to get your money back in spades, and you're going to grow the economy. It's all good. The only thing that where you would go wrong is if you're lending that money for speculation or for things that are not going to grow the economy. Of course, you have to watch out for corruption and fraud and all those things. But assuming you have 100% transparency and full accountability, lending the money very cheaply to state and local governments, it seems to me, is the way to go. That's what they should have been doing that all along. It's a form of quantitative easing for the people. It's quantitative easing for the economy rather than for a private banking system that virtually destroyed the economy.
And we know, I was going to mention that before, we know how corrupt and fraudulent and just downright dirty the private banking sector is. For example, just recently, the Deutsche Bank in Germany admitted to rigging some of the precious metal markets and gold. But the list goes on and on about the lies and the deception, the collusion and the manipulation, and just the entire sector needs a serious independent audit, because they are only out for themselves. They are only out for the Wall Street economy. The Main Street economy has completely suffered under the weight of this monopolised money supply. And it just is an absolute joke. I mean, we know that Occupy movement in 2012, they were trying to bring to light this issue to the masses, but we remain as a society willfully ignorant of such an important bloody issue. I mean, we all complain about trying to fix poverty and help, what's going on socioeconomically, and got mental health problems and addiction and all these problems, poor infrastructure. We've got a whole gamut of issues that we could literally fix right here, right now, if we undertook a transformation in the way that we design our money supply. And the people that were allowed to take control for all these years have not done the ethical and responsible thing for you, for us, for all of us. So until in Australia, one of our Labor parties, which, this duopoly is an absolute joke, who work for the same corporate and banking interests, but they wanted, one of them, just to get a bit of public attention, want to create a royal commission into the banking sector. And bloody oath we should do this immediately. We should do it to many industries, including pharmaceutical and a whole gamut of stuff that has been monopolised. The amount of ill health and suffering that these systems have inflicted on our society, and we still haven't woken up as a collective and demanded this change. And this is the most fundamental aspect of the control matrix, the money supply. People need to get this deep in their minds and in their hearts and in their activism, that this is where we need to collectively focus on to deal with the amazing amount and the plethora of other issues that we face. Because if we deal with this issue, then we can deal with all the others as well. So I know that was a little bit of a rant, because I'm quite passionate about this subject.
I agree,
though. In terms of, in Australia, where it's alleged that our Reserve Bank of Australia, the central bank, is government owned. Now, I'm not entirely sure about that. I think it's really difficult to ascertain, given the mystery and some of the secrecy around who owns what shares are in what, where the profits go, all the rest of it. But to go back to a previous question, should we have a public central bank, not a private Federal Reserve, but a public Federal Reserve that is on a national scale, or as well as a state scale or a local scale? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I would see, ideally, if you're talking about the easiest thing to do, that's a little different from what your vision would be of what the perfect system would be. But ideally, it seems to me, yes, we should have I would say the whole system should be publicly owned, because all we're talking about is, picture a big community currency system. That's all we're talking about here, is where money is created when one person does something for somebody else. That's the way it is in a community currency system, right? They get credits and debits. So the people collectively, it's a cooperative. The people collectively own the money system, and they control how it operates. So I think that's what we should have. It's like one big community currency system, basically, where we're all, but then that assumes that you trust people. There is that issue. A lot of people don't trust government. So we're not there yet where we trust the government enough to manage the whole thing. But ideally, let's look at the beehive model. Ideally, we're one big beehive. We're all sharing, and we're just looking for a means of making it fair, how we work for each other in a fair way where we all get a fair return. So ideally, I would see like a publicly owned central bank, which we could all have an account at the central bank. It would be totally secure. There's no way your money can get wiped out, because it's just numbers held at the central bank. It's like a big computer that holds your numbers. Once you earn those numbers, they're up there, and there's no reason that somebody else's loan should have anything to do with your numbers. If somebody else borrows, they're not actually borrowing your money. They're taking out an advance against their own credit. That's actually the way the system works now. And they go through all this rigmarole to make it look like they're borrowing from a pot that doesn't really exist. Every night the banks have to balance their books. And if they don't balance, they go to another bank or to the repo market and they borrow just overnight. So they borrow the money just to balance up the books. And the next morning it goes back. They give it back. That's what the repo market is. And then all day long, the books are out of, the money comes in, it goes out. Bankers make loans. They don't look to see how much money they have. They just make the loans. And then at the end of the day, they look to see what they've got. And if they're short, they borrow again overnight. So why do they have to go through all that? Let's just acknowledge that when you go to the bank to take out a loan, All you are doing is turning your IOU into something fungible that you can spend in the marketplace. Like if you go to the grocery store and try to write out an IOU for your groceries, the grocer's not going to take it. But you can go to the bank and say, here's who I am, here's where you can find me, here's my collateral, here's how you can attach my wages if I don't pay up. The bank will, and here's, and I'll pay you something for the privilege. The bank will write you numbers into an account that look like dollars, but they're not really dollars. Or they'll give you a credit card that looks like real money. But really, it's just a credit card that's just giving you an advance against your own debit, something that you have promised to pay later. So they have turned your promise to pay into money. Your promise to pay has become a negotiable instrument, which has become money. So let's acknowledge that that's all we're doing here is formalizing our IOUs into something that that we'll have to pay it back, and there's a system that ensures that we'll pay it back, and that's what money is. So you could have your local public banks issuing loans because they're the ones that know the market, they know the local economy, they can take the time to work with you if you're the borrower to help you, meet your commitments, etc. So the local public banks would be in the nature of sort of agents of the central bank is their backstop, or where ultimately where the numbers come from. But the local public bank is working with the public, responding to the needs of the local economy. That's what I would envision.
Oh, look, that's good. Let's have a global dialogue around this, because people are disconnected with reality on this level on so many different layers, and until and people have a right to disrespect the government's role. They have not been effective employees of the people. They've been effective employees of lobbyists and big money that has swayed policy direction and decisions. So they need to start having a lot of accountability and transparency about how they operate. It's clear that there's so much dissent into society, many of which form into the libertarian and anarchist movement. And when I say anarchist, I don't mean bloody chaos. I mean no rulers. And it's true. The government should not be ruling over us. They should be representative of what we ask for. That's the simple role of government. And I do believe that one day we can get back to that, or we can create that. We can have a transparent government, an accountable government that is, and a minimal government that is only doing some of the organisational work that we do need to ensure some of the needs that we have on a social level. Also,
I just suggest one way that, ultimately, it seems to me that Bitcoin, or the algorithms used for Bitcoin, could be the system that is our fully accountable system that is not actually controlled by politicians, if you see what I mean. It's not government in that sense, but it's something that we all share. It's collectively owned and controlled, fully transparent, fully checkable at many different places. So it's not just, somebody at the top manipulates it. We've gotten so computerized already. You could envision a computer program that made it completely transparent, completely accountable, completely foolproof. We haven't gotten there yet, but it seems to me that's a goal to work toward.
Absolutely. They're trying to move into a cashless society and get everybody into the system, and that's obviously not where we want to go. We don't trust you guys. You haven't been accountable. You've been unethical in your approach. People are waking up. And if you don't understand this stuff yet, if you're watching and haven't really incorporated this into your understanding, and this is the time. From an Australian point of view, we have a huge private debt to GDP ratio. Massive housing bubbles and other assets bubbles. I think we're only second to China in terms of their housing and private debt to GDP ratio. That's quite a scary situation we're in. A lot of our economy relies on the housing market. Once that goes poof, so does a lot of our prosperity and wealth, so to speak. So there's a party called the Australian Sovereignty Party. They're all about sovereignty, obviously, and they've put together some really amazing economic policies. Unfortunately, they won't be contesting this next election because of an AEC sort of store on their registration, but that's another story. But what they do have some independent candidates. So if you're Australian, check them out. Check out the independent candidates. They've got an amazing repertoire of policies that deal with all of the issues that I talk about on my channel. But what they propose, Ellen, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about it, is that stop all private banks creating money out of nothing. They have to have these accounts with the public central bank. If they need more money to provide more loans because they don't have it in their base, then they can get it from the Reserve Bank. What happens is through that process, there's going to be, say, each year about $80 billion of debt's going to be wiped off through people paying it back. What they propose is the central bank creates that $80 billion plus another 40 for immigration and population growth. So $120 billion all up, and they inject that money into the economy through infrastructure projects, so to ensure a deflationary environment doesn't occur based on all that debt getting paid back. So, for example, right now, $77,000 per head is attributed to each Australian in debt. If we pay off $80 billion a year, that is going to lower that $77,000, which means that we're going to deflation. So they want to create the money out of nothing, quantizing QE for the people, invest in infrastructure, and make sure that we keep a consistent amount of money supply as to what we have now. So do you consider that a good idea? Could that work?
I think any form of quantitative easing for the people is a good idea. You know, there are the social creditors will say that you need to give the money directly to the people to spend, because if you put it into infrastructure, you're still putting it into jobs. Well, anyway, there's a shortage of money in the system, and that you really need to get it right into the pockets of the consumers. So that's one way to do it. But yeah, I'm actually writing a book called Infrastructure Without Debt, and it's basically about that, using QE for infrastructure.
All right, great. Well, Australian government, take bloody note, because we've got some serious issues. We are aware of them. You're not doing your job. I need you. We all need you to step up to the plate and start dealing with this money issue fairly. Like, let's talk about it. Let's put it on the table and deal with it in a transparent and fair way. All right. Now, what do you do about the private Federal Reserve? How are you going to make that public? What's sort of the things that people can start doing on a local level and state and national level to start transforming this sector into something that's actually a worthy contributor, something that we can actually be proud to call, a system for the people?
Well, it seems to me that the first step is for people to really understand how money works, because as the Federal Reserve has really fallen in its status over the last 20 years or so. I mean, when Alan Greenspan was chairman, he was like God. When Greenspan spoke, the market listened, and now people are very critical. People are aware that they're not really publicly owned, that they're composed of 12 branches, all of which are 100% privately owned by the banks in their district. So people are highly suspicious. In November, we had an infrastructure bill that for 10 years, Congress has been fighting over how to fund. Everybody knows we need infrastructure, but they can't agree on how to fund it. So they finally came up with the solution that I would say was the ideal solution. Get it from the Fed. The Fed is able to print the money. So what they did was they took a portion of the dividends that the banks are, ever since 1913, the member banks have gotten paid 6% annually, for doing nothing. So they took a portion of that, and they took a portion of the reserves of the Federal Reserve, because what does the central bank need reserves for? They print the money. It's like Santa Claus. Santa Claus doesn't need toys, he makes the toys. So they took some of that, and then of course there was a lot of protests, but that was the step. They've opened the door to this formerly inviolate institution. And I think there are steps towards transforming it, hopefully. But again, it's going to take a huge populist movement and a huge waking up of the people in order to change the system. But I think there are all sorts of signs that that's happening. We've got candidates now who are like nothing we've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, candidates that are not, they're not coming up through the ranks. They weren't groomed by the establishment. They're outsiders who are come in and who are saying radical things about how to fix the system, how to change the system. I just make one comment on Australia and your central bank. You know, you had the ideal central bank model in 1912, from 1912 to 1923. When we set up our Federal Reserve in 1913, Australia also had gone through a big banking crisis. And the government decided that the private banking system had failed and that they were going to set up a public bank, a government-owned bank. So they set up the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and they put a banker in charge of it who understood how banking worked. So the bankers came to him and said, well, now you're going to have to borrow from us to fund your bank. And he said, no. He said, I think we're just going to issue the credit of the nation. We don't really need to borrow. And so that's what he did. They issued credit and funded all sorts of industry all across the country, and they funded Australia's participation in World War I without borrowing, specifically without borrowing from the City of London. And that was how this City of London had kept control over the colonies that had politically broken away, but that were still dependent economically. It worked really well until his name is Dennis Miller. He went to London and bragged in 1923 about the fact that that Australia didn't need to borrow, that you were self-sufficient, you had funded all these things without borrowing from the City of London. And he suffered a heart attack right after that at a relatively young age. And then they put in a committee instead of a committee that was in charge, which they could control. And that was the beginning of the central banking system, where they set up a system where you would have these national or central banks that were under the Bank of England as the head of this pyramid. And the central banks would issue the money rather than the treasuries of the governments, and then that could be controlled by the Bank of England. And then when the Bank of England, or when England no longer was financially able to maintain that structure after their World War I deaths, then it moved into the Bank for International Settlements, which was a combination of the Central Bank of England, Germany, France, and the US. And that the BIS continues to be the central bank of central bankers. But anyway, you had the model there, so that might inspire your politicians to consider going back to it. It's a very Australian thing.
Well, we're just a puppet of this existing order. I saw that yourself were mentioned as a potential solution in the Colbert Report's documentary called A Century of Enslavement, I think it was. And in that video, he talked about the documentary. He talked about how the history of privatizing the money supply unfolded. I'm so glad that you spoke to that. I was not aware of that. That's something that I've certainly learned.
It's detailed in my book, The Public Bank Solution.
Right. Okay. Okay. Beautiful. And yeah, it's certainly something that we need to start taking bloody seriously, because we are in a pretty critical era of humanity. This debt is spiraling out of control. The Main Street economy and the middle class is eroding. There is so much more suffering in general in terms of poverty and other socioeconomic disadvantage. And if people can't unite to start taking these issues seriously and force our representatives, our employees to start taking these issues seriously and have a public dialogue about them, then I guess we've sanctioned our own demise. Any final thoughts, Ellen? Have I missed anything?
No, I don't think thanks. That's pretty discursive.
All right, well, I really appreciate your time. Excellent body of information there. We finally got there. I know that you've been healing after your own sort of situation, but thanks for coming on the program. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really hope this video, this information reaches not just the people, but also elected officials as well that need to start reconsidering the way that we design our economy.
Thank you, Philip. It's great talking to you.
You too. Cheers.
Can I just mention my websites?
Oh, of course.
Okay, so my website is ellenbrown.com or webofdebt.com. It'll also get you there. And the Public Banking Institute's website is publicbankinginstitute.org. Thanks.
No worries. And for anyone else who wants to follow up on this sort of information, there's plenty of documentaries on YouTube, plenty of books about it, really simply made or presented information to really wrap our heads around it. And also, if you're new to this channel, please subscribe. Heaps of really amazing guests that I've had in the program that have unpacked not just the problems we have in our world, but some of the solutions, the real alternative solutions that we have right here, right now, to mitigate and to overcome the toxicity that we have in our world today. Thanks again, Ellen.
Thank